I would be sharing the floor with Heather Dutton. I was especially pleased to know that I was going to be speaking with someone who has an authentic connection to the agricultural community, to be talking about environmental issues. And then as we started getting to know each other a little bit, to come to, well, reinforce what I already knew, is that people who work in the agricultural community have very strong ties to the environment. And the original conservationists, and sometimes those lines have been drawn in the sand a little too firmly, so it's great to be able to maybe blur those lines a little bit, to speaking with somebody who has the authentic ties to the agricultural community, but also a very authentic engagement with the environmental community.
I'm just loud, so it's going to work either way. We were chit-chatting before, I guess last week, and kind of saying, well, isn't it fun that they put us two environmentalists, both genuinely and kind of tongue-in-cheek, because Casey and I have, we won't go into that hour-long conversation that we had preparing for this session, but I think that if we all take a step back and think about, so initially when Emily said, we need better engagement with the environmental community, I imagine, minds went to certain places and you thought of certain people, certain groups, certain events that maybe give you an idea of who an environmentalist is to you. I want to tell you who an environmentalist is to me. So for the last couple of years, I've been fortunate to be the manager of the San Luis Valley Water Conservancy District, and I work for an outstanding group of people in that role. In the 5 years before that, I was the director of the Rio Grande Headwaters Restoration Project, which is a nonprofit organization in the San Luis Valley working to improve the health of the Rio Grande for every person, animal, and just live being and otherwise that depends on that river. And so the coolest thing, if I had to pick one thing that's awesome about that organization, I would say that it was started by farmers. It was started by people in the San Luis Valley that recognized that the river was degraded, and they wanted to know what they could do about it, and how to do it, how to get funding, how to do projects. And we've got some pretty cool videos about the restoration project where we have my favorite farmer, my dad, on screen talking about why the river matters to him, and how a functioning river that is healthy for fish and healthy for ducks and all those, and rafters, is also a functioning river for us to pay our compact obligations and for us to get the agriculture entitlement out onto the valley floor and use it for irrigation. And so Casey and I wanted to pose this question of what is environmentalism, but also maybe challenge you to think about how maybe everybody in this room is a bit of an environmentalist if you're willing to admit it.
Thanks, Heather. I would also like to say that as Executive Director of the Colorado Watershed Assembly, I find myself able to visit many parts of the state and have really enjoyed the time that I spent in that sort of flat half of the state on the Eastern Plains. Originally, I'm from South Dakota and grew up on a dairy farm, but now I find myself in Denver, Colorado, where I've been for about 30 years. And the environmental community's voice is very strong there. I sometimes feel that I moved and I haven't gone anywhere. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of how the state works and how our state economy works. Heather and I toyed with the idea of Birkenstocks and very sensible hats and cowboy boots and overalls to sort of exemplify those differences, but we decided to compromise, and instead I brought some hemp hearts if you would like a little bit of hemp here. Heather, enjoy.
Yes. And I brought some delicious beef jerky.
All right.
Casey.
Is this gluten-free?
I didn't check. Oh, these are stuck to my hand now.
I know.
I'm gonna consume these over here.
Oh, this is open. Oh, it's open.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
They're only slightly sweaty now. So should we open it up?
Sure, I would love to hear from other folks in this room. What is environmentalism? what does environmentalism mean to those of you in this room? And is it being an environmentalist different from being a conservationist?
I know someone who wants to say something.
I want some beef jerky.
What is that?
It's from hemp.
Oh, the heart of hemp.
I think it's a great conversation piece about just the language that we speak. And so when I hear environmentalism, there's a certain picture that comes up because of my experience with some environmentalist advocacy groups. And then when I hear conservationist in talking about, I think I'm a conservationist in where I live, because I think about all the wildlife that resides where I live from the irrigated agriculture. So I think it's now, some of my friends think I've been corrupted because I have a light green tint, because I've learned from my environmental friends in the San Luis Valley about environmentalism isn't as dark and sinister as maybe I thought it was. So I think we have a language barrier. I think if we really examine environmentalists, conservationists, if we can get past that, we'll see that we have more in common. Irrigated agriculture, in my view, is conservation. And so we have not only some perceptions that we have to get past, we have to be able to listen and learn from each other. So I've learned a lot and I have some environmental friends who now have listened to my side of the story. And of course, Heather has been able to bridge that gap. I think we have a language barrier, we have a perception issue, and for the Water Congress to be able to pull in all the diverse groups to make the organization more vibrant, I think if we will take a moment and think about the language barrier that we have, and we do have a perception. So when I think about environmentalism now, I'm really leaning towards conservationism and what is good for the environment, for the whole environment. So I think this is a great topic, and I'll just pause right there.
I'm going to tell a little story, if I may. I became the watershed coordinator for Cherry Creek, which is a little creek that flows from the Palmer Divide through Douglas County, Arapahoe County, and Denver. Three very differently politically oriented counties. But I was told 20-some years ago, you know, a watershed, you want to know anything about a watershed, go to the Boulder Wash website, just take whatever information they have and link it to your website, and that's all you need to tell people. So I went to the website and I looked at what was said there, and there were basically three things. My water comes from the mountains. We conserve it and put it to use in the city, goes out into the plains, and then it's polluted by agriculture. And I thought, well, I'm going to take that back to Douglas County, and I'm going to have this message, and it's not true because our water does not come from the mountains, and it's offensive. So it was not a message that was going to play in that particular watershed. So I think from both sides, from the environmental side and whatever you want to call the other side, if there is such a thing, it's really important to language is important. What you think you know about another group of people or another part of the state, I think that needs to be examined very carefully and discussed very carefully. I like the opportunities of more tours, the opportunity to get out and meet people, spend time socially, and really get to know where our food comes from and get to know what the markets are.
Okay, I really like the light green thing. I've farmed my whole life, and and I like to consider myself an environmentalist. Light green. I like that. My problem with the environmental movement is just what you're saying about the Boulder wash. What did you do to correct them?
To correct them?
Yes.
I did try to have that conversation, and ultimately just knew that for them that was true. That was a true statement for that group, but that wasn't going to be a conversation that was going to resonate in our watershed. And
And I thank you for that, but that is not a true statement. Their beliefs were not true.
You're right.
As long as we have the media that latches on to the Boulder wash instead of folks like you that are actually trying to help me be light green instead of anti-environmental, I think it's almost a moot point. That we need folks like you being interviewed on 9 News, not the Boulder wash. Sorry.
Well, I don't want to beat up on Boulder here today, but.
Yeah, I think we kind of knew going into this that this can be a pretty sensitive and emotional topic, and so thank you for your willingness to share. And I think you bring up a point that we had also discussed preparing for this, is that, so what is CWC's role? And is it to communicate out and to make sure that people that otherwise maybe wouldn't have all the facts would have the facts and would have the very best science? Or is it to communicate with our own members and instead of trying to talk about environmentalism as a genre, more talk about the great work that people are doing within our organization and talk about the issues and maybe what are those issues that people specifically want to hear about? I guess that's a compound question, so if we were in court right now, I'd be asked to restate it. But who's got some thoughts on that? You got it. You guys moved all the chairs, you made it tough for us.
I don't know whether this is what you want to hear for sure. I hadn't put any thought into this for today's conversation. But the Water Congress, I've thought about the issue, what's an environmentalist, my whole life. And I don't like labels. I've never wanted to be labeled anything. I can put labels across the spectrum on my back to you tonight for roles that I've had to come from and who I am. But rather than do that, it's the belief systems that drive this debate and it would seem as if the role of the Water Congress is to try then and always point out, and maybe we just focus on our membership, and then the membership, which includes environmentalists with a belief system that is a religion in some ways as opposed to simply the science, but that the role needs to be to focus on the science of what's what in terms of water use and where it goes, as opposed to the religion and belief system that causes so much polarization between the entities. Because I've had a Sierra Club label on my back before, and I deliberately dressed with my arm side out to project myself to people. Some of that's deliberate on my part, but it's that. And I've been involved in the water interest with this debate and discussion and trying to bridge that inability to communicate, where I've got good friends on water issues in my community, where the environmental side and me as the water guy, we spent a day on a tour trying to show the environmental benefits of what was going on in my community. This is exactly the thing you and I were talking about during break, John, and we failed. We talked right by each other. He spent the day trying to preach me into his camp. I spent the day trying to preach him into my camp, and we ended the day still friends, but we had failed to communicate to each other. We were not listening to each other. the Water Congress role maybe needs to be to try then and really force each other to listen to each other. I don't know whether that's got value, but that was my first blush response to that.
So I applaud you guys for having this conversation. I think it's good. There's definitely been, I think, a long history. I've been coming to Congress conferences since 2003, I think, as an employee of Northern. And they've definitely changed. And I think the role of the environmental community, the conservation community within the larger water community has really changed in the last 15 years. And so I would maybe like to just take a step back and think about the fact that we all have, depending upon the issue, we all have different stakes in the ground. Sometimes we argue about things on an environmental basis. Sometimes it's because you're harming somebody's senior water rights. Sometimes it has to do with land use decisions. And so the environmental community is just one player in Water Congress. And I think maybe it is underrepresented. I look around the room and I think I am the only person that works for, okay, so 2 people that work for some sort of or 3 that work for some sort of environmental organization. And that could be changed. And I think that could be changed by some dedicated outreach and conversations. But there are a lot of people that work for conservation organizations that participate in Water Congress and participate in state affairs. But part of it's just that, there's only a dozen environmental groups in the state, and each one of them has one person that's maybe paid to sort of keep tabs on Water Congress. And so part of it is a manpower issue as well. It's not necessarily an interest issue. Keep tabs. Right, participate. Maybe I should say participate. Right. And so it's maybe not as big of a problem as you might think it is. And I would just say foster some conversations with the people that come to state affairs that work for those organizations.
That's exactly what we've talked about internally. After we got our results of our member survey back, that's kind of a realization that we had, is that there are a handful of these huge environmental organizations, and just like you said, they send one person who is in charge of communicating the viewpoint of hundreds or thousands of people. And so it's going to be a challenge to hear from everyone in the way that we maybe hear from the ag community or municipalities. And so I appreciate that response, because that is exactly what we were wondering, if it's kind of the issue.
Who's first? Are you going that way?
I'm headed back.
All right, I'll go this way.
Oh. Sorry, I didn't see that. Whoever gets the mic first.
Oh, shucks.
Okay, well, I spent a career as a fish and wildlife biologist, and a lot of people would consider me an environmentalist type. But also through that career span of 35, 40 years, I've realized the value of talking to be it the water users, how the water gets used, be it a utility, ag. And I think the role of the Water Congress would be to provide a forum for basically this same type of a discussion that we're having here. I mean, as the supervisor for Fish and Wildlife Service on the West Slope, I went down to the San Luis Valley. We got a habitat conservation plan for some endangered species done. But if it weren't for the willingness of the Rio Grande Water Conservation District to have those discussions, I think it would have never happened. And I think the overall situation was win-win for the environment, for the water resources, et cetera. So having those discussions and the collaboration, to me, is key to getting effective conservation done. I try to avoid using the word environmentalism just because of the negative connotations, and I spent my whole career doing that type of thing. But so I think having those discussions, providing the forum, would be an excellent role for the Colorado Water Congress to provide.
Yeah, I
kind of agree with some of those sentiments as well. I think it could also be taken even more broadly and more deeply than just at Colorado Water Congress itself. So I work in Denver Water's Conservation Department. We just rewrote our 10-year plan, and one of the things we did was put together a big stakeholder group. So we invited everybody from some of our suburban distributors, as well as representatives from the Colorado River, as well as other environmental groups, to say, these are the targets we're going to set. What do you think? And by getting all those people in the room, I mean, a lot of the environmentalists who usually are always there kind of saying, you need to do more, you need to do more, you need to do more. We need to cut this, we need to have a 20% reduction. They kind of understood better from our perspective of why maybe that type of a goal setting wasn't very appropriate. You know, when you say Denver Parks needs to reduce by 20%, that could mean turning off Cheeseman Park entirely, because they have become very good stewards with their water. And I think that gets to a lot of the point of some of the agricultural interests as well, where it says we're using our water for a purpose. It's not that we're just dumping it and wasting it. There's a direct value to the way that we're using our water that we want you to understand. And when you facilitate that conversation on those more individual levels, I think can really spur that conversation to percolate up as well. And I would challenge, you know, I asked to come to this because I think it's important conservation gets talked about. I haven't seen any of my colleagues from other conservation departments at this venue. It's great to have some people from the very top, because you guys are making the best, you know, the big decisions, but you have a lot of really good advocates who get to work with customers individually, who could really provide some interesting points to this conversation as well. Just a thought.
So it sounds like there is a definite need identified for us to, or for Water Congress to reach out to the environmental community, invite them to the table. I like what you said about you spent the day preaching, and there's a lot of preaching and not a lot of accepting, but maybe we just keep trying and build trust with each other, and then over time maybe we can realize how much we have in common, and instead of just seeing our differences. We're almost coming on our time, and so the next question was, in addition to kind of reaching out and better engaging the environmental community, what kind of environmental interests is our community interested in, recognizing that it also encompasses some environmental interests, as Nicole very aptly pointed out, so thank you, Nicole. But what kind of things are you guys interested in hearing about in communications that may be classified as more environment or conservation, or I'm going to pick on Travis again. I know he's interested in Watershed Health. So what would you like to see in communications from Water Congress?
What about soil health with the Watershed Health and our water environment to our communities and to the state? Just more information on our soil health.
Thumbs up on soil health, Donald. Who else has?
In a very self-serving way, I just want to invite you all to the Sustaining Colorado Watersheds Conference coming up in early October, where we're very glad to have a whole session that is on soil health, but in acknowledging and recognizing the importance of agriculture and watershed health in general. And then I'd also just like to say, we've come a long way since the 1970s, and we have had some successes, and we can celebrate those successes. And maybe rather than, you know, continuing a conversation where we might be in conflict and we're looking at a problem, where are some areas where the collaborations have worked? Can we celebrate some successes? I think Nicole mentioned earlier the idea of showing successful collaborations with respect to stream management planning. Maybe that's something that, you know, a partnership can be formed to do more celebrating of actual on-the-ground successes.
Stay tuned, because Travis will be talking briefly about that tomorrow on a panel.
Awesome. Yeah, we totally can.
Well, and maybe a lot of organizations have deep benches, but they're not necessarily people that you interact with on a day-to-day basis. And so one thing Water Congress could do, if you're looking to sort of broaden the level of communication with the environmental community, is to get to know the people who work at a staff level. You know, you may know the one person at the TNC office that comes to Water Congress, but you don't know anybody else. And so be inquisitive about what they're working on and who they are and what they're doing, and you'll find some amazing things that you can then bring to the conference. But some of that's going to be incumbent, I think, on Water Congress to be curious.
And I think that's what this whole day or afternoon is about, is what do we need to be curious about in order to make change. So I really appreciate it.
And I think we also need to recognize that it's not just we've come a long way since the 70s. We've come a long way since the 2000s. It wasn't that long ago that we didn't even have a representative on the board of environmental organizations. I mean, we've gone, come a long way in a pretty short time. And I think that the water community themselves, whenever they look at developing a project, and this has not been the last 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, but it's been for a long time, look for how you can develop it in an environmentally sensitive fashion, how you can bring environmental benefits to the table when you're doing it. So, we shouldn't beat ourselves up too much, because we really have reached out. I mean, we've been beat up. I know I've been beat up a lot over the years, but we've reached out too. So, and there's been a lot of change going on. We need to recognize that and celebrate that change, as opposed to just saying, well, how can we reach out more? We are reaching out, so.
Yeah, who hasn't been beat up, right? Had their lunch money stolen. I like the idea where the HCP in the Valley was highlighted. Thank you for bringing that up. That was a really cool effort between a governmental entity formed to and with the mandate to protect fish and wildlife, and then they all worked together for the benefit of local irrigators. And so it was a huge success story in saying, we can do more for this bird together than if we both go at it separately. And so I think maybe, Casey, you have someone who wants to talk, but if you want to be thinking while he's talking, that are there success stories that you think would be great to share? Maybe we don't have a specific genre or idea of the type of environmental stuff we want to hear about, but if you have some kind of cool success story, do you want to bring it out so Emily has an example of stuff to go hunting for? Yeah.
Sorry, my name's Jason. United, we actually worked on a project with Central Colorado Water Conservancy District and Ducks Unlimited on a recharge pond. And we designed an 80-acre recharge. Oh, there's Randy. There, he knows all about it. This was his project. So he knows everything about that project, but we worked with Ducks Unlimited, and I've been out there when we've been recharging, and it's covered in geese and ducks. So I think that was a huge success.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Success stories that are a lot more than
I'll bet.
We've got two.
Oh, thank you. I'm here wearing my hat as a board member of a local water conservancy district, but I'm also very active, as is my colleague who spoke a little earlier, with the local Audubon and actually the state Audubon chapter. And I don't know if this qualifies as a success story, but we have locally and at the state level within Audubon worked very hard to get Audubon members, who I would call quite dark green in general, and that includes myself, to understand that Audubon, that particular group, is not just about birds. You need to consider habitat, you need to consider water. We have had presentations. In fact, we've had more presentations on water and issues around water and that sort of thing, really, than we have about bird identification, because and I think people are some people will never get it. They're just birds. They don't care. But I think a lot more people, and perhaps again my colleague Al, who spoke earlier, will confirm this. But I think a lot of people in the chapter now understand that you can't ignore water issues and geology. I mean, it goes beyond water. Anyway, I consider that a success, looking at it from an environmental group trying to expand our understanding of things that affect our main interest, which happens to be birds.
Thank you for mentioning Audubon. I'd like to point out that they are probably one of the foremost organizations engaged in citizen science. They've been conducting bird surveys nationwide for over 75 years. And okay, thank you. And that information is really critical in project implementation. It can be critical in funding for projects and post-project monitoring as well.
In the previous one of the previous sessions on stream management plans talked about developing or putting on a website the different successes with stream management plans. But what about just the successes of where, different water projects, whatever they may be, whether it's the San Luis Valley HCP or, there's a lot of successful water projects that have been done that have done conservation for the whole system. So maybe have a website of success stories that could be showing the success. And sometimes those successes were very painful for all those involved, Northern in your 14 or 16 years or whatever. But, ALP and all those types of things that, so that there is more positive stuff out there instead of all the negative stuff that people usually focus on. So just a potential suggestion.
Well, I don't want to ask if there are any journalists in the audience, but if there are any journalists in the audience, I think a message is, some positive news, some success stories would definitely be very welcome.
I think you guys are looking for success stories, right? Our district, Central Water District up in Greeley, Colorado, we're about a $30 million partner in the Chatfield reallocation project. And we're very, very proud of the creation of what we call an environmental pool. It's 2,100 acre feet of releases will be managed by the Parks and Wildlife to mitigate low stream flows in the Denver corridor. Partnership with Greenway Foundation, Denver Water, Central Water Conservancy District, our water right will fill that space. That's the intention. We're still working out some details, but I think that's a good collaborative effort. It involves municipal partners in the project, involves the state, involves those folks that have interest in the river health and the recreational amenities downstream of the dam. And just kind of want to share that little bit of story. But we also have issues, and I heard from a previous speaker, so that got me thinking about the Chatfield project. Although there's so many good things, we still have a few hurdles to overcome.
I thought we had 10, 20 minutes ago, but we'll keep rocking out here.
Well, here we go. We're going to keep talking about this.
It's fine. It's fine.
Okay, first of all, I want to apologize to you for putting you on the spot up there. I had a knee-jerk reaction there. It felt good, though, I got to tell you. Oh, man. Secondly, if we're talking about success stories, I'll follow up with Randy a little bit, but gentleman talking about the Audubon Society got me to thinking about one. In Morgan County, we've put in a lot of augmentation ponds, a lot of re-regulation ponds for sprinklers. Probably 7 or 8 years ago, I had no idea. If you'd have told me what a blue heron was, I'd have said, sounds kind of ugly. Now we have, I don't know the head count around there, but we have a lot of blue heron flying around the neighborhood, and it is cool. I mean, you don't think about it, but we're all in this together, and we're all trying to do our best, and it would be nice to hear about some of the success stories.
Thank you. I think sometimes we forget that we're part of the environment. I mean, people are a big part of the environment. It's not just the wildlife.
I have kind of a interesting one. So it's a little bit more, less kind of fixing a problem that we created, and kind of looking forward for climate change is a huge concern for for Denver Water and for, I'm sure, a lot of you guys. And one of the big issues for us is forest fires. And so we spent about, I believe it's $30 million up in the Lake Dillon area to go through and to treat trees, to remove trees that were killed by beetle kill and remove them from our watershed. We became concerned because the cost of forest fires, just two, was about $30 million as well. So we went through and partnered with the Forest Service, originally the feds, but have now brought in the state and kind of renewed that contract to improve the watershed health before it even becomes a problem. Because the last thing you want is for a major forest fire by your largest piece of infrastructure, and also the towns of Frisco and Dillon and the like. And it's been a really good partnership, kind of showing we are good stewards of our land as well as the land adjacent to us, and that we care about our watersheds and the people who live in it. It was kind of interesting.
Well, Emily, I think one of the things we are hearing is that people do want to celebrate those success stories. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think we should have a campaign where people show their light green. It can just, hey.
Yeah. Or we'll
Doesn't have
pinch
to
them.
be too crazy, but just, we got a little bit of light green.
That could be the title of our, when it goes out in our e-news, our success stories.
Yeah.
We call it, like,
How about sage green? I kind of like that.
All you need to look at is downstream of the many despised reservoirs in the state of Colorado and see all the folks whipping the water. I guess because they're angry at it or something, that they're standing there, thigh deep in the water and just whipping at it. I believe almost every gold medal fishery in the state of Colorado is downstream of a reservoir. And that's one of the facts that most people seem to have forgotten nowadays. If you're looking for, and a lot of folks, the anglers, don't want to mention that at all because they'll find more competition out there. You don't want to share your secret spot.
That it's funny. I'm going to pick on you a second there. We have a success story for us is that we have a really outstanding representative from Trout Unlimited in the San Luis Valley who has brought some great new ideas and stimulated some great new thoughts, and he does get it. Yeah. And he recognizes the role of the reservoir, and his partnership with Travis is having to improve the fishery, and so he's doing his best to communicate it to the angling community. And so it's really cool to see that kind of old adage being tossed away.
The rafting community, in particular the Colorado Eagle, they realize the dry year on the Eagle River means great rafting in the Colorado Reservoir changing because there's going to be a lot more releases made from Green Mountain and from Wolford and from Williamsport, and that's going to keep rafting going all throughout the season.
Yeah, my name's Steve Reich, and I'm with the Water Conservancy District. I just wanted to tag on to what Dave said. Last year, we worked with Linda Bassi over there with CWCB to release 12,000 acre feet down to the 15-mile reach for the endangered fish program. So it's a kind of a success program.
Yeah, I think you may have just understated that one. That was a huge success. That was an incredible project that you guys should all be really proud of.
But very few people hear about it.
I don't want to, I'll throw out a couple, or another comment or two. And as we look for success stories, I think it's important sometimes to think that maybe they're not all win-win, and that there's some, it's a more complicated story. We need to, and that needs to also be a role as we tell these stories, is to emphasize some of the more complicated and what, as you, in the design stage, might appear to be a win-win, ends up having some negative ramifications down the road that we didn't have the foresight to see, and trying to, that goes back to the science that I advocated for a little bit earlier, as opposed to belief system. That discussion is a really important part of what Water Congress needs to do as we wrestle with these issues. I mean that in a constructive way as I lay that out.
So if I could add, I was in the State House from 1987 to 1993, and then I went on the wagon, and then I came back when I fell off the wagon. But I remember going to a Water Congress meeting in Gunnison, and Glenn Saunders speaking to us and saying, "There, I know what the state water plan is. We have the rights, and that's the plan." And so and then Freddie Anderson would tell us a horrible joke about the majority. I'll tell you later if you have a beer. I'm not going to do it out loud. He'd do it at lunch. But anyway, I think there's so much more collaboration now and more openness to new ideas. Just look at the state water plan. I wouldn't have believed this back then. There is a section on stream health. And they use that word, health. It's not water in the stream, it's how healthy is the stream, which is an ecological concept, right? And then you have conservation, a section on that, and land use. And we were fighting like hell to try to have that happen back then. So I think people are far more open now than they used to be. And more collaborative. I mean, the state water plan to me is just amazing that it happened. I know there's a long way to go. And having said that, I do think there is a long way to go. I think we have a lot more to do. It's a more scarce resource. Our population's soaring. Because of climate, we're going to have less water, and we're going to have to get so much better at this. But I appreciate everybody doing that work. And the fun thing about the state water plan is the legislators, we were around the state with the hearings and heard all this work that was going on, and it's truly impressive. So let's just keep doing that.
Last call, or that was the last one, so it's last call for hemp hearts and beef jerky. We're still sharing.
Special reserve.
Yeah, it sounds like the resounding message is that there's an opportunity to communicate with the environmental community as we know them and kind of reach out, get to know people better, build some trust, bring them into the fold. And then there's opportunities to communicate about environmental issues to our members through pertinent topics and then also through some really great success stories. So if somebody has something else to add, if I got that wrong, you can let me know, or you can grab Emily later and say, that girl's crazy. But otherwise, thank you guys for being here and for being candid. It's not always easy to kind of share your personal stories. So we really appreciate it.
Thank you all. I turned it off.
But wait, there's more.
Passion on Kirk's offer.
What part of what part of Colorado is that picture in? When,
Asked us to put a happy place slide in. That's my hometown. That is here in Jacksonville Beach, or Jacksonville, Florida. So there you go. There's a happy slide.
we used to have this kind of thing here in Colorado until Dave Merritt's predecessor. We spent millions of years tearing down the ancestral Rockies, and they built this new Rockies up there, and we don't have these anymore. It took a doggone long time. Okay, good. All right, thanks. This will be our last topic. Hi, Heather. Yes, Heather's going to hang in here with me. Yeah, I'll introduce Heather Dutton.
You may remember me from a minute ago.
They won't forget that, I can tell you. So this group is really good. They're a little more interactive. There may be something with people that have a last name that starts with N and beyond that tend to be more engaged in issues. We'll have to track that over time. One of the things that jumped out at us from our demographics, we'll do some questions here. So we did ask people about how old they were and how long they'd been involved in water issues. We even asked them what political party they were members of. And I think we only got one or two people that actually said, "Who the hell do you think you are asking me what party I'm in?" As though that information wasn't publicly available in other ways. So. Okay, so when we did the survey, many of you may have expected this result, that generally the people that were responding to the survey had a lot of experience in water issues. Over half had 20 or more years experience in water. And 30%, 10 to 20, and then you can see there, less than 10 years, 20%. One of the things that this points out to me is we may not be reaching out to the younger members of many of your organizations, and that is, to me, is a communications issue. Okay, so let's toss this around. So, in terms of gender of response, this issue is going to be all about demographics, so it'll be a lot less controversial than everything you've heard today. Gender survey. So what do you think the male-female balance would be? Give me some numbers. What do you think? 60-40? 70-30? 80-20? 95-5? Which way? The obvious way. Okay, so of all the respondents, we had 260 respondents. People seemed to be okay with answering the male-female. So Nicole, you were the winner on that. Well, that wasn't cheating. There's a reason that was published up on the website, so you could all have read it prior to this session.
I was stuck in her traffic.
Okay. Okay. So, how many of you think that? Where do you think this organization leans overall? And we're just going to assume for the moment that the survey responses were reflective of the entire membership. Now, that may or may not be true. What's that?
What was the yield?
We had 260 responses. That our survey said consultants said was pretty good. We sent out about 1,500 requests. Apparently that's good. Seems a little weak to me, but anyway. Yep. All right. So, what do you think? Where's the conservative, Republican versus Democrat versus Independent? Where do you think we lie? Unaffiliated. What's the difference between unaffiliated and independent? Okay. All right. Wait a minute.
I can't believe I opened my big mouth. Unaffiliated is how you're known as with the Secretary of State. Independent is how people feel about it.
Yes.
So most of you are saying we're kind of in the middle? Did I hear that as a consensus? Okay, so the responses were actually leaning a little more Democratic from those that responded. 36% Democratic and 27% Republican, and a good chunk in the middle. So, right, I mean, you have to, as our survey consultant told us, you've got to run all this through a very careful filter to see whether or not any of the results are really what you think, or whether or not they're statistically significant or not. So, anyway. So, right. Well, maybe. So, here's an issue that seemed to poke out at me come up from me in the issue. So when we look at the change that may be coming, if you look at now, we're looking at wedges, so when we're looking at over 65, only 9% of the respondents were female. When we looked at that wedge from 45 to 65, that was 28%, and younger, 46%. So it's telling you you've got a much younger, I'm sorry?
Because the future is what?
Because the future is... The future is changing or something. Something new's coming. Did you feel the wave on its way? If you, our survey consultant was a little saying, you look at the even younger demographic, we weren't sure we had enough responses to be statistically significant. But if you take that down to under 35, that number is 54%, majority female. of what's coming in.
That's because we aren't sending young men to college. The college enrollment now is close to 60-40. The college enrollment now is close to 60-40, 60% women, 40% men. I've been following this for a number of years, yeah. We aren't sending, we're losing our young men going to college. We aren't sending our young men to college. A small thing that I see in the local scholarship program, which I head up, 2/3 of the applicants are women, consistently for the last 20 years. And if you look at national college demographics, 60-40 is even, it may be a little bit heavy on the number of men that you will see in most colleges. Some are at 65-35. So yeah, we have a problem nationally in sending our young men to college, which is not being really well addressed.
I didn't know that. How long this will take to really change who this organization is, I don't know, but you can see that a trend is coming. Let's look at another one on party affiliation. This one struck me. Over 65, 42% Republican, 45 to 65, 27%, only 15% under 45. That surprised me a little bit, I have to say, but and whether or not that left into that chart is significant or not, I don't know yet. Parallel to that is a Democratic, so you see 26 to 45% as you move to the younger. So that, as that changes, I don't know. What kind of issues, Heather, do you think that presents? Where did this slide come from, Emily?
Talking dolphins, guys, that's my cue.
Yeah. So, I mean, do we see some issues here coming that we might want to think about?
This topic, we're talking about communication. So we're talking about how can Water Congress engage members, and I bet we could all say a lot about the stats Doug just threw out there. I was a little disappointed that you didn't say survey says, but regardless.
I was going to do that and I forgot. Oh, shoot.
Shoot. Missed opportunity.
Can we do that again? Maybe.
Yeah, let's start over. So if we're talking about engaging a changing demographic, the question for you guys is, do we need to change the way we communicate? And I think there probably would be a gut reaction to more social media. The funny thing is, I heard Emily blasting on Twitter and Facebook. I'm in that camp too, so that would have been a fun question of who's on Facebook, because it's not us. But it seems to me like the communications conundrum among different generations and demographics, is not as cut and dry as we would think it is. I told you guys that I work for an outstanding board. I have folks ages 30 to probably 68 on that board. And the funniest thing that I found in communicating with those guys is, if I want to get a hold of my 30-year-old, I have to call him. If I want to get a hold of my 60-year-olds, I have to text them. They do not respond to calls or emails. And so it's kind of surprising, isn't it? But I think people have embraced technology for their lifestyles, and so it might not be as simple as we think, but we are interested in knowing what you guys think about if we need to be changing how we're communicating to make sure to stay relevant and to reach out to our population as it changes.
Thoughts? No thoughts.
They're marinating.
Okay.
There's some of you who are going to get this mic if no one volunteers. You guys, yeah. Do a what? Let's have Nicole ask her question, and then I like where your head's at.
So my question is, I guess, goes back to what Doug's point was, which is, what is Water Congress given the demographics of who participates? And so it's not necessarily a communications question, but it's, does Water Congress want to be the place where young professionals come together? Because you are definitely moving in that direction and your survey results show that, but I guess it's maybe a reaffirmation of that strategy before you start talking about whether you want to change your communications. So I would ask that of you in terms of your long-term strategic plans.
That there's no question in my mind, if this issue is not addressed, and we're not, I'll say it this way, if we're not engaged with this issue, and at some point it's going to be too late. Because the younger folks will find another place to go, and then you're trying to bring them back in. I think that's a particular problem. Did you have a comment over here? Or are we good? Okay. As we're looking at this, the survey that we have has a whole lot of data in it about what are the platforms that people are using on. Heather talked about Twitter, and somebody mentioned Facebook, and even from our organization, you think, well, maybe the younger people are going to be in that. The survey doesn't show that, and which I found kind of interesting. It's still very low. It doesn't mean you don't do Twitter, because who's watching Twitter? The media. So if we want to communicate with the media, then we need to be using that as one of our tools. But overwhelmingly, when people said, well, on communications, where do I want to get that from? It is it's conferences and events. More so than email, more so than e-news. It was that expectation that came out, that bubbled up as the #1 way of doing that, and that was across all age demographics. And that, to me, I found interesting, and I think gets to your point as well of even the younger folks are feeling this kind of networking environment is a good thing for them, and that's really important.
Yeah, I have a Twitter account, and the only time I use it is in January to try to win prizes. And you can't win prizes because John Orr wins them all with the Twitter feed at the annual convention. So, do you want to say what you just told me? No, that was off the record. So how do you guys like to communicate? Doug just said the results of the survey, but is there anything that's surprising? Does everyone prefer to get emails? Do you want Emily to text you the emails? They'll be long ones. Do you like the newsletters, the website? What's your favorite? Whose favorite is emails? Who perouses the website when you are not sent a link through an email? Who just wakes up and is like, oh, I wonder what Doug and Emily are up to? SK, Diana and Bruce, you got some stalkers out there, that's good. It's a good distinction. We had a conversation about stalking last night, so I'm glad that you distinguished it.
The older members really seem to prefer email over any other, more than e-news. And when we got to the young, when you talked about, we asked a question about what platform are you most interested in hearing? It was like 80% of those over 65 were on the email, and when you get down to the younger group, it dropped to like under 40, around 40, which I thought was kind of interesting, 45, I think. So. Yeah. So no easy answers here on where we're going, but keeping and finding ways of being welcoming, and there's a lot of different ways of communicating. I mean, part of it is through the platforms that we're using, but also it's, are we doing what we can at conferences and events to reach out to those that maybe you don't know? When I first came out in this organization in 84 or 85, it was difficult because I felt like there was kind of this insider group that was kind of in the know, and the rest of us were just there to sit at their feet and learn. And after 30 years of that, eventually, you can't expect people to sit for 30 years anymore like some of us did. But to be able to, when you see people that are obviously new at an event, are you reaching out to them? Casey, behind you.
I'm backed up over here.
A couple of really quick thoughts. I didn't fill out the survey, Doug, but in terms of the emphasis that the survey put on events and conventions, I would have been there. And I've been coming to Water Congress longer than you, maybe as long as almost anybody in this room, or maybe more than anybody in this room. I have always come to sit there and get taught. I come to this day for that. I think it's extremely important. I think that still needs to be the focus of the Water Congress.
Casey?
Thanks. I was going to ask the question, when you see the older demographic growing smaller and the younger growing larger, what about mentoring? I mean, what do you think about how do you learn? How does the next wave gain the benefit of the history and the experience of people who have been involved in Colorado water for, in some cases, 50 years or more?
I think I can speak to that a bit. I showed up here a handful of years ago, and I can proudly say that you guys are all a very welcoming, friendly bunch. Everybody that I've ever sat down to and talked to and asked about, well, what do you do? Why are you here? People always respond very kind and willing to share their passion. So please keep doing that. But it's not without intimidation. There's a lot of really smart people sitting in just this room, and there's 2 more rooms of you guys. And so it makes me wonder if we need to be doing more, if we're going to have more new people, more young people, instead of just doing what we've always done. Do we need to set up a formal mentoring program? Do we need to, how do we make sure that people feel welcome so they don't come one time and say, well, those people were really friendly, but I'm still super scared? How do we keep people coming back?
What I didn't see in your demographic slides are who are these people? In other words, are they employees of a water conservation district, or are they board members, or what are they? Because how you address them might have something to do with what their involvement is. If you're a board member, you may only meet once a month. If you're an employee, you may be getting your information from your employer, and what message you're trying to get to them may differ depending upon who they are in terms of their role.
Excellent point. And I do think that being it's late in the day, I did not want to hit you with our Excel spreadsheets and start getting into diving into the data. I sat over a glass of wine and did that with Dick Brown last night. And we could just go on for an hour and look at this and look at this and look at this. I think we learned a lot from that survey. We did ask that question about what level are you? Are you a board member? Are you an entry-level engineer? How long have you been involved in water issues? We did. So we can sort all the data that was, there's 20-some-odd questions. All that data is sortable by age group, by political affiliation, by gender, by the type of person that you are, where you are in your professional area. So we certainly could have done that, but I think I would have lost most of you here doing that. The communications committee will be spending a lot of time over the next probably 6 months looking through, because there's literally that much information in there, and a lot of things to learn from this organization. And much like any other survey, as soon as you do a survey, hopefully that's what it does. It leads you to ask more questions. And so one of the questions is, as we look at the results from that survey, what more do we want to and need to learn? So that, I think, is part of it. The other thing that, in talking with Heather, was
is part of the problem what we just did, is segmenting, the population. Is that really, I mean, there's maybe things that you can learn from that, but is dividing people into groups really the right way to go with communications? And go ahead with that, and I'll have a follow-up.
Yeah, we talked about that in prepping for this session, that I think that for me anyway, a couple of years ago we had the speakers that came at lunch in January. You may remember it was probably cold. And we were talking about succession, and we were talking about millennials, and I was like, they don't know me. They can't put me in a box. I was in all the boxes. I'm a millennial, guys. And right down to where, remember that farmer I was talking about? They said millennials are best friends with their parents. I don't know anyone cooler than my dad. So I think that maybe for me anyway, there can be some things we can learn about boxes, but Doug and I were also talking about how, hey now, I don't live with my parents. I have my own house. I pay a mortgage. I'm a real adult. I have cats. But maybe is putting people in boxes not productive? Does it make people shut down? And I think that's another question that we wanted to pose to you guys. The question about politics. I know that as soon as people start affiliations with derogatory terms, I don't really want to talk to those people anymore. And so, is it not constructive to put people in categories, or what do you guys think on that one? Is that what you want?
Great, yeah, that's a great question. Maybe I haven't yet any feedback. Yeah, can we run a mic? Heather, can you? You're a little closer. Yeah.
Oh, you're my MVP.
So I don't know. Is anybody else here under 30? Sweet. I was gonna say, it can be super intimidating to kind of look around the room and to kind of say, it's difficult to try to communicate with some of you guys because you have been in the business for so long, and you do have a lot of that knowledge, and that's definitely knowledge that I came here for personally. I definitely want to learn from you all. As somebody in a very urban environment, this is, in 4.5 years, the first time I've been able to speak to an agricultural water provider. Even though I've sat on 2 other boards or events with different groups, this is the only place that I've been able to talk to somebody from the agricultural community to hear their concerns. We get asked about it all the time, because people are critical, even in Denver, of you're buying up these farm water rights, you're destroying these farms. People care, but it's really hard to make that connection. But it's also intimidating because how does it get, kind of created, whether it be the media or in our own perceptions? It's, and I don't mean to be offensive, but it's, a grumpy old white man talks down to millennial who's a buffoon and aloof. And how much do we get kind of caught in that assumption even? It can be pretty counterproductive. So we want to be careful. I'd say definitely try to reach out, but you have to be careful to not completely alienate before we even get in the room. And I'm sure vice versa.
And I think there is some vice versa to that, because even if you look at the older demographics too, sometimes it's harder for them to break into the cliques of the younger folks, because they're kind of all bunching around as well. My kids, they're playing soccer, it's all bunch ball, right? They're all kind of moving around together. And yeah, so that's another issue. And there are people like Bruce and stuff that have you get around younger folks. Well, you have kids, so that helps, but when you see them kind of together in their cliques, you're having trying to break in. Yeah, so with people like Bruce, it's a little easier to break into that perhaps. But yeah, Dave.
Yeah, I don't know if Bruce is a good example, because I don't really look at him as a grown up.
I think Bruce is a bad example.
And, you know, I think you need to remember that all of us old folks were young once. Travis and I were having breakfast this morning and talking about, you know, the years ago when we started coming and wondering who are all these old guys. And, you know, it's incumbent upon all of us to mentor. I don't think we need a formal mentoring program, but each of our organizations. You know, I was given an opportunity 32 years ago to get involved in this organization by somebody who, you know, was an old guy, I thought then, but it was much younger than I am now. And I think all of us are looking toward the opportunity, not the obligation or, you know, but the opportunity to pass the baton on and to spend, you know, time discussing and, you know, just gaining from the insights of the new folks also. It's not, we're going to tell you what to do. It's, you know, this is what we have done, but it's your job now. Take it and run with it. You know, this is how we did it, but don't worry about that.
That was really, really well said. I think it's incumbent on the older generation, or it's us whippersnappers, to give folks the respect that they deserve and that they've earned for. Sorry, John, don't want to make you nervous. For the experiences that people have had, and that those experiences are valuable. I was telling Casey this morning that in my job, all the time, I'm like, I have this great new idea that no one's ever thought of. It's going to be awesome. And then I check the server, and it's been talked about, you know, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And so there's a lot of ideas that just kind of percolate around, at least where I'm from. And so having that knowledge, having people that are willing to share their story without saying, wow, you're really dumb, because maybe I'm not dumb, maybe I just didn't know we already talked about it, is really helpful. And then, you know, for us to give that respect, but also have it be reciprocal. So I think now we've moved on to therapy, where we're all going to talk about giving each other respect.
Yeah.
Mike, did you?
And the great thing about it is the older you get, then you forget you ever had those ideas, so they all now seem like they're new ideas.
Yeah, I guess one of the openings I see is the colleges and universities. I don't know what's changed, but I've never been interviewed so much in my career as over the last 4 or 5 years. And I mean, the interests are in collaboration, in natural, balanced use of natural resources and those sort of things. So there's a kind of a much more nuanced student, I think, at this point. And if we all think back, I mean, those that went to college, those are life-shaping years. And so really working with the faculty and student populations that are actually, I think, providing much better training in these areas than, say, 10 or 20 years ago. I think that's an opportunity that ought to be pursued.
Fantastic. Well, I think we're kind of getting to the end of our time here. Emily says we are at the end of our time, so we'll go ahead and wrap up. But I think the important thing that my takeaway from this is we need to make sure we're communicating across a very wide spectrum of ages. We don't want the older folks to feel like they're being pushed out, and we want to be welcoming towards the younger folks as well. And one of the ways you can do that is reach out to somebody new at a conference.
Yeah, I think one of the best ways to make friends and to share things is to have a beer with people. So Doug, would you like to join me in a beer?
Oh, well, thank you.
Hot damn. Guys, I'm not a bag lady. I don't have a massive purse.
Okay, yours, after we... what?
Yeah. You want to be in the cool kids club? No, guys,
In the old days, we used to kind of hold the bottom.
You need a knife?
Too late.
learn from each other.
We do.
Me about bringing beer to public places.
Exactly.
You about how to drink it. Man.
Okay, well, we've done a lot of learning from each other. Thank you for participating in this little experiment that we've had. The next couple of days will be a little more traditional in terms of presentation and that kind of stuff. So thanks for hanging out with us on this. And the next step for you, if you want to do the gondola, is a gathering up for the reception. So follow the signs to the gondola. Meg will be there for tickets for you. Thanks.